36 seconds. That's how long it took Vice President J.D. Vance to try and humiliate Jasmine Crockett live in front of 1.7 million viewers by questioning her intelligence. But what he didn't know, she'd been preparing for that exact insult for 11 months and carried the proof in a sealed envelope. So here's the question: what happens when the loudest man in the room gets crushed by the quietest woman at the table? This is a story worth every second of your time. The panel was supposed to be forgettable. Polite smiles, water pitchers, sweating on polished oak, a lineup of federal leaders trading sanitized sound bites about school funding reform. Cameras rolled quietly in the back, and journalists already half distracted tapped headlines that would never trend. The title card read, "Bipartisan Solutions, Bridging Gaps in Education," the kind of government phrase that promised nothing and delivered less. But beneath the surface, tension flickered. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett sat third from the left hands, folded binder closed but heavy. Her eyes scanned the room like a surgeon before an incision focused, precise, unreadable. She didn't come to perform, she came to deliver facts. And for the first 90 minutes, she did exactly that. Graphs, testimonies, a district-by-district analysis that made even the moderators lean in. But then came the interruption. J.D. Vance, Vice President of the United States, didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He leaned forward like a man slipping a knife into conversation, dressed as a handshake. His fingers tapped once on the mic. "Maybe we should both take an IQ test," he said. Just like that, the room fractured. It wasn't a shout. It was worse. A smirk disguised as suggestion. A trap gift-wrapped in civility. Lynette Harmon, the panel's moderator, and a seasoned PBS journalist froze mid-blink. The press row stiffened. You could hear the shift, the hush before lightning strikes. Somewhere near the back, a paper coffee cup rustled against the floor. Aid pens stilled mid-note. Jasmine didn't move. Not right away. Her eyes stayed locked on Vance, unblinking, unreadable like glass cooled to ice. She tilted her head slightly. Just slightly. "Is that your closing argument?" she asked, soft enough that the mic picked it up with surgical clarity. Vance shrugged. "Just a thought." He turned his attention back to the moderator, assuming his work was done. Assuming the next sound would be a change of topic. A chuckle. A transition. But Jasmine Crockett didn't move on. Slowly, deliberately, she reached down beside her chair, the fabric of her blazer shifting as she moved. Her hand disappeared into a black leather briefcase. Not hurried, not showy, just inevitable. A moment that felt like a drum beat heard from underground. From its interior sleeve, she pulled out a single white envelope, clean, crisp, sealed, gold insignia of the Congressional Testing Initiative gleaming under the stage lights. No words, no performance. She slid it across the table with 2 fingers. The room exhaled in a gasp, audible, sharpened. Lynette Harmon didn't speak. Couldn't. Her eyes flicked from envelope to Crockett, then back to Vance. J.D. Vance didn't smirk anymore. He didn't speak. He just stared at the envelope like it had started ticking. "I asked them to keep it sealed," Jasmine said, still calm. "Just in case." The camera lights seemed brighter now. Phones in the press row tilted forward. The panel wasn't about Title I funding anymore. It was about something far older, something colder. Who gets to question who's mine in public and who has receipts waiting in silence? Jasmine leaned back in her chair, her fingers still, her face unreadable. Not smug, not defensive. Just done. That envelope sat on the table like a detonator. And the only question now was whether J.D. Vance had just lit the fuse. The envelope landed with the sound of soft paper, but the weight of a verdict. The room didn't breathe. For a split second, even the whirring of the live stream cameras seemed to stutter. This wasn't theatrics. This was precision. Jasmine Crockett hadn't raised her voice, hadn't flinched, but she had just flipped the entire dynamic of the panel with one silent gesture. She didn't look at J.D. Vance. She didn't need to. The message wasn't about him. It was about something much deeper, much older, the war against quiet erasure. A beat passed, then another. J.D. Vance shifted slightly, but it wasn't casual anymore. It was tight, contained, rehearsed confidence slipping into something raw. His smile had vanished. That smirk he always wore like armor in public rooms was gone, and what replaced it was calculation, Or was it fear? Lynette Harmon's voice faltered for the first time all morning. Congresswoman Crockett, are you saying that's Jasmine? Interrupted gently, not with words but with a nod. Yes, she said. That's my CTI score. Sealed, certified, last fall. You could feel it, a ripple running through the panelists, through the audience, through the 1.7 million people watching live. This was no longer about education policy. This wasn't even about the insult. It was about a woman who had underestimated her entire career and planned for it. Flashback. 10 months earlier, a testing center outside Fort Worth. Jasmine arrives alone, no press, no staff, under an alias. The building is beige, fluorescent-lit, clinical. She signs her name quietly. The receptionist hands her a pencil and a rule sheet. She smiles, says thank you, and walks into a soundproof booth built to measure problem-solving under pressure. CTI, the Congressional Testing Initiative, a voluntary program. No political weight, no media play, just pure data. Most laughed it off. She didn't. Not after the third hearing where someone called her emotional. Not after the 10th headline that questioned her credentials. Not after the whisper that followed her everywhere. She's smart, but is she qualified? Back in the room now, Jasmine keeps her hands folded as the gold-sealed envelope sits untouched in the center of the table. JD stares at it like it might explode. His communications director, seated 3 rows back, mouths something urgent to an aide. Nobody moves. Nobody saves him. Lynette Harmon clears her throat, eyes flicking to the side for legal cues. A staff attorney at the edge of the platform gives the smallest nod. Jasmine doesn't blink. It's mine. I authorize the opening. Even the moderator hesitates, as if the envelope might contain not just data but consequence. She reaches out slowly, cautiously, like a judge, about to announce a sentence that will echo far beyond the courtroom. And as her fingers curl around the edge, her thumb brushing the embossed seal, the tension doesn't break. It crystallizes. In that second, the story isn't about IQ anymore. It's about preparation. It's about foresight. It's about the woman who came armed, not with insults, not with applause lines, but with proof. Quiet, undeniable, sealed. And now every camera zooms in as Lynette begins to lift the flap. But no one, not even JD Vance, is ready for what's inside. The seal cracked with a whisper. 1,000 hearts held in suspension. Moderator Lynette Harmon peeled open the envelope like it was radioactive, her fingers trembling just enough to betray what the entire room was thinking. This wasn't just a test score. This was a trigger. She unfolded the single sheet inside heavy parchment, embossed heading, and scanned it with narrowing eyes. The silence grew unbearable, pressing against the walls like rising floodwater. She looked up, then down again, as if reading it twice would make it less consequential. Finally, her voice cut through the air. The participant Congresswoman, Jasmine Crockett, scored within the 98th percentile in analytical reasoning, 97th in spatial logic, and 95th in executive processing speed. Overall cognitive index places her in the top 2% of federal leadership cohort testing. And then nothing. No applause. No rebuttal. Not yet. Just silence. The kind that follows a detonation too powerful for noise. JD Vance sat back in his chair, blinking. Just once. Then again. His jaw moved, but no words came. He looked at the letter like it had betrayed him. Like the numbers on that page had rearranged the entire narrative he had spent years constructing on stage presence, on perception, on power. In the back, a camera light blinked red. The live stream viewer count ticked past 1 million, then 1.4, then 1.7. Newsrooms across the country were already clipping the footage, slapping on headlines, splicing it into Twitter threads, and breaking news alerts. On screen, the split view held on one side the Vice President of the United States, speechless. On the other, Jasmine Crockett, still, calm, untouched. She didn't lean back, didn't smile, didn't smirk. Her expression didn't shift an inch, not toward satisfaction, not toward revenge. Just eyes forward, hands folded, letting the truth do what the noise never could. JD Vance, who had built a brand on outmaneuvering opponents, sat visibly rattled, his practiced gravitas leaking at the seams. Lynette cleared her throat. Mr. Vice President, would you care to respond? The room leaned in. JD hesitated, then finally spoke, his voice low, hollowed out. I wasn't aware those scores were meant to be made public. Jasmine didn't blink. They weren't, she said, unless someone asked for it. There it was. The final twist of the blade, quiet, undeniable, clean. A few journalists snorted under their breath. A staffer near the sidewall mouthed damn to no one in particular. And still Jasmine didn't gloat. No fist pump, no zinger, just silence weaponized as precision. Outside the room, Twitter trended #envelope energy. Inside, the hierarchy shattered. This wasn't a rebuttal, it was a recalibration. For the first time, JD Vance looked like a man who had lost the room. Not with failure, but with fear, because he now understood she hadn't waited for the moment to strike. She had built toward it, quietly, strategically, long before the lights, long before the insult. She didn't react, she came ready. And as the envelope sat between them, ordinary in appearance, but nuclear in impact, a single truth filled the room like oxygen in reverse. What happens when a woman doesn't raise her voice, but still wins? Before the envelope, before Congress, before her voice cut through silence like a scalpel, there was a girl at a plastic kitchen table gripping a stubby pencil and squinting at a stack of overdue bills. I am 12 years old. Cedar Hill, Texas. The hum of an ancient ceiling fan overhead, the scent of lemon pine sol clinging to linoleum floors. Jasmine Crockett sat with her feet dangling, a checkbook balanced on her lap, trying to make sense of numbers that didn't. Her mother, Renetta, was still in scrub shoes, kicked off at the door, and collapsed on the couch after a double shift at Charlton Methodist. Her father, Desmond, wouldn't be home until Sunday, another 18-wheeler run between Odessa and Dallas. In this house, survival wasn't dramatized. It was just math. She learned fast. If the electric bill said $108.73 and the checking account had $112.15, you didn't ask for new shoes. You stretched groceries with creativity and coupons. You figured out how to freeze milk, how to patch school uniforms, how to carry yourself with straight posture, even when your socks had holes. Jasmine wasn't taught to be strong. She was expected to be. And she met that expectation like it was oxygen. At school, she was quiet but not timid. She watched everything. She learned faster than most kids, but not the way teachers liked. She asked too many follow-ups, too many what-ifs. When the class moved on, she stayed in the margins of the page, chasing nuance, dragging out meaning. Some teachers grew impatient. Not Mr. Hobbs. He saw it. 7th grade history, late fall. The air was brittle with the coming cold. Jasmine had stayed after class to ask about court cases mentioned only in passing, names that had no photos, decisions that had no closure. Mr. Hobbs didn't answer right away. He reached behind his desk, opened a drawer, and slid a worn paperback across the table. Thurgood Marshall, American Revolutionary. The spine cracked. Pages dog-eared. Jasmine stared at it. You might need this, he said, voice low. Don't let folks shrink you just because they can't measure you. That sentence hit her harder than any textbook ever did. She carried that book home like it was sacred. She read it in slivers between helping her mom measure insulin and microwaving frozen dinners. Marshall wasn't a saint, he was relentless, strategic, underestimated. The kind of man who waited for the right courtroom, the right moment, and dismantled systems with precedent and precision. Jasmine didn't want to be him. She wanted to study with him, to learn the language of pressure, the rhythm of power. She kept the book under her mattress for years, the pages curling with use. When teachers said you're too intense, she remembered that line. When she was told to be more agreeable, more polished, more neutral, she pictured Marshall standing before a hostile court, making history feel like a scalpel. By the time she was 15, she didn't fantasize about prom. She fantasized about hearings, arguments, courtrooms where words could burn paper into fire. She knew already one day someone would question her mind. Not her passion, not her presence, her mind. And when that moment came, she would not raise her voice. She would raise the receipt. The scholarship letter came folded in thirds, water stained at the corner from the leaky mailbox. Jasmine opened it at the kitchen counter, heart pounding like the floor might fall away. Partial tuition, Prairie View A&M. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't Ivy, but it was hers. She turned to her mother, eyes wide, and for the first time in months, Renetta smiled like the weight had shifted just a little. College wasn't a dream, it was a contract. Jasmine packed one suitcase and boarded a Greyhound with 10 printed syllabi, 3 packs of ramen, and a spiral notebook with Thurgood written on the cover in black Sharpie. The dorm room was smaller than her bedroom back home. Her roommate dropped out by mid-semester. Jasmine didn't. She stayed up late annotating Supreme Court opinions while her part-time job at the student cafe left her hands blistered from the steam trays. Some nights the hunger was literal, but she fed herself on case law and caffeine. She didn't wear ambition like jewelry. She wore it like armor. In class, she didn't speak often, but when she did, the room slowed. Professors noticed. "You don't argue like a student," one of them told her after a debate on voter ID laws. "You argue like someone who's already been cross-examined by life." Law school came next, University of Houston. She nearly didn't go. The tuition made her chest tighten. The deadlines swarmed. The first semester almost broke her. No trust fund, no safety net, just a box fan, second-hand textbooks, and a side job waitressing at a breakfast spot off Montrose, where the manager never spelled her name right on the schedule. But she showed up on time, hair pulled back, fingers ink-stained from redlining her own briefs on the bus home. She was always tired, but never defeated. In her third year, everything crystallized. It was a mock trial, just an assignment, just a simulation. But Jasmine didn't treat it like theater. Her client was fictional, but the struggle wasn't. A black mother wrongfully denied housing assistance. Overwhelmed. Ignored. The same vacant eyes Jasmine had seen in Renetta's mirror after a 14-hour ER shift. Jasmine didn't argue like she wanted to win. She argued like someone was watching who never got a voice. She demolished the opposing counsel. With logic, with restraint, with timing so clean it felt like choreography. The judge, a retired state circuit veteran, pulled her aside afterward and asked to use her closing statement in future coursework. Jasmine nodded, then walked to the bathroom, locked the stall, and cried, not because she was proud, because she was exhausted. But in that moment, something shifted. It wasn't about being impressive. It was about being undeniable. She didn't chase clerkships with senators or pad her resume with panels. She went where the pain was. Public defense. No glamour, no promises, just towers of files, phones that never stopped ringing, and clients who looked at her like they were seeing a courtroom ally for the first time. Jasmine wasn't building a brand. She was building a blade. And long before she ever reached Capitol Hill, she learned how to sharpen it in silence. The folding chairs were half empty, the coffee lukewarm, and the promises so hollow they echoed. It was a Thursday night town hall in South Dallas, just another community engagement stunt wrapped in buzzwords and exit surveys. A city official in a too-tight blazer promised new school roofs by 2026. Another talked about broadband access like it was rocket science. Jasmine sat in the back, arms crossed, watching neighbors nod, not because they believed, but because they were tired of hoping out loud. Then a woman stood up, late 50s, hair in a scarf, hands trembling. "What do we do when y'all forget us again?" she asked. The room shifted. The official smiled nervously and muttered something about accountability measures. Jasmine's stomach turned. She looked around. Nobody pushed back. Nobody challenged the lie. That night she didn't sleep. By morning, her decision was made not with certainty, but with a fire that refused to extinguish. She didn't have a political machine, no party funding, no PR firm, no viral launch video. What she had was a $23 website, a spreadsheet of block captains, and a pair of heels that would carry her through 77 living rooms and 114 porches. She knocked every door herself. "I listened to every story, promised nothing except this: I'll show up. I won't code switch to be palatable. I won't dilute the truth to fit a room. I'll walk in whole or not at all." Election night came like a gut punch, slow, agonizing, street by street. She won by 400 votes. No confetti, no champagne, just a text from her mother. "They better be ready for you." Congress wasn't designed for people like Jasmine, not just because of her skin, but because of her sound. Her voice didn't rise, but it cut. She didn't posture, but she pierced. On her first day, a senior representative asked if she was a staff. Another assumed she was lost. She wasn't. She knew exactly where she was and why. Committees learned quickly when Jasmine spoke, time stopped. She didn't waste syllables. She came with receipts, not anecdotes. And when men interrupted her mid-sentence, she didn't scold. She paused, let silence stretch like wire, then finished unapologetic, undiminished. Staffers called it surgical. Opponents called it aggressive. The press called it controversial candor. She called it surviving. She had seen too many voices softened until they were echoes. Too many women contort themselves into whispers just to be allowed a seat. Jasmine refused. She wore her history like a second skin. She didn't grandstand, didn't thirst for camera angles. But when the lens found her, she stared straight into it like she had nothing left to fear because she didn't. Every time she entered a chamber, she carried not ego but memory of a checkbook on a kitchen table, of ramen and red pens, of mothers begging for answers at town halls full of mirrors and no windows. So when the panel came, the insult, the envelope, the shift, it didn't rattle her. Because the real question was never, can she handle the heat? It was, how do you stay calm in a room designed to shake you when you've already walked through fire just to get in the door? Long before the insult, long before the cameras, the tie clips, and the trap disguised as a joke, J.D. Vance was rehearsing. His story began in Middletown, Ohio, a rust-streaked town tucked between forgotten highways and faded factories. It was the kind of place journalists parachuted into when they wanted to photograph declined graffiti on brick-broken glass near the pharmacy, a diner waitress with too many shifts and not enough sleep. J.D. grew up in that noise, but he wasn't shaped by its silence. He was shaped by how he could frame it. His memoir hit shelves like a Molotov cocktail disguised as a confession. Hillbilly Elegy, a tale of dysfunction and redemption, of climbing out of generational quicksand using sheer intellect and a borrowed ladder from Yale. America drank it in. The right called it proof that poverty was a mindset. The left called it self-serving oversimplification. J.D. called it survival. He toured newsrooms like pulpits, clean-shaven, chin-raised voice trained in legalese, but laced with just enough Midwestern grit to be marketable. He hasn't forgotten America. He was branded America. By the time he entered the Senate race, he'd shed the hoodie for cufflinks. Big donors smiled. Political action committees lined up. He didn't have to prove his suffering, he had already copyrighted it. Yale law gave him credentials. The Marines gave him masculinity. The book gave him a myth. The man who once stood in food pantry lines now gave speeches about self-reliance to crowds who'd never been hungry a day in their lives. His rise wasn't paved with struggle, it was curated. He understood narrative better than most, how to slow down his speech just enough before a talking point, how to narrow his eyes at just the right moment during a hearing. The pauses weren't hesitant, they were staging. J.D. Vance didn't enter rooms unprepared. He entered them with scripts carefully coded to strike empathy without vulnerability, anger without threat, intelligence without intimidation. And it worked. It worked until he met someone who refused to play by the script. Jasmine Crockett wasn't in his chapters. She didn't come from the consultant class. She didn't compliment before she cut. Her existence wasn't a foil, it was a fracture. Because unlike J.D., she didn't need to narrate her pain for validation. She wore it, carried it, weaponized it when necessary. And she didn't blink when power postured. J.D. noticed her long before the panel. He noticed her in committee rooms when her silence made men squirm. He noticed how she didn't rush rebuttals. She waited, listened, then dropped statements like sealed indictments. His team flagged her early, smart, volatile, unpredictable. But they were wrong. She wasn't volatile. She was composed. She wasn't unpredictable. She was prepared. But J.D. didn't revise the script. He doubled down on the brand clever, commanding, confident. He thought that was enough. He thought if he dropped the right line, maybe we should both take an IQ test, he'd trigger a moment of hesitation. Force her into anger. Make her the headline, not the argument. But what he didn't realize, what he never learned in Yale or on campaign buses, was this. You can't outplay someone who's not performing, and you can't outmaneuver someone who packed the truth in silence, waiting for the exact second you'd underestimate her. Behind closed doors and beneath campaign slogans, there was one name that made J.D. Vance's team nervous in a way no poll ever could: Jasmine Crockett. Not because she shouted, not because she staged walkouts or grand speeches, but because she never blinked. She walked into every room like the lights didn't faze her, like the microphones weren't weapons, like she'd been outnumbered before, and won anyway. In the memo leaks that surfaced weeks after the panel, one sentence appeared again and again in JD's internal prep notes. She doesn't interrupt. She lets you finish, then buries you under it. That line wasn't a metaphor, it was survival intel. Staffers compiled entire folders on her, dozens of transcripts, red-circled quotes, annotated clips from hearings that had never gone viral but still cut deep. She never used volume to win a moment. She used timing. On a Tuesday morning strategy call, JD's comms director warned, "She's strategy smart, not just soundbite sharp. That's more dangerous." Others on the call agreed. Jasmine didn't just speak, she cornered. She made senators stutter without ever raising her tone. Vance's research team combed through every public appearance she'd made over the past 2 years. They clipped moments where she paused just long enough to make the silence feel like a verdict. They studied how she used data, not like padding, but like a blade. She didn't read notes. She remembered numbers. She didn't rehearse lines. She landed punches you didn't feel until 3 seconds too late. There was one exchange buried in a budget subcommittee hearing from Indianapolis, where she'd waited through 3 interruptions before calmly saying, "Do I look like I need your help clarifying anything that clip never made national headlines?" But in JD's war room, they played it twice. Because it wasn't just what she said, it was what she didn't say after. She didn't roll her eyes. She didn't smirk. She just held the stare. Let the man flounder. Let the silence tighten. Then pivoted back to her point like nothing had happened. JD hated that kind of control. It was the kind he couldn't replicate. His strength came from dominating a room, taking up space with posture, with pedigree, with tone. But Jasmine didn't dominate. She dismantled it, quietly, methodically, like someone who never forgot the cost of speaking too soon. So when the education panel was scheduled, JD prepped harder than usual. He watched 3 of her old interviews in full. He made his team mock debate against her transcript quotes. He rehearsed over and over the line about the IQ test. The plan wasn't to provoke, it was to reposition, to make her look reactionary, emotional, uncomposed. But he forgot the one variable that couldn't be measured in strategy decks. She wasn't playing defense. She was playing the long game. And when she reached for that envelope, when she let him walk straight into the line he thought would shake her, JD Vance realized too late. He hadn't been preparing to challenge her. He'd been preparing to lose. The line wasn't spontaneous. It had been rehearsed, tweaked, memorized down to the cadence. "Maybe we should both take an IQ test." JD Vance didn't come up with it on the spot. It was born in a private conference room 3 days before the panel, where his senior aides scribbled phrases on whiteboards and circled the ones that could sting without sounding cruel. He needed something that would land like a joke but cut like a blade. Something that would make Jasmine flinch on camera under lights in front of a bipartisan crowd. They knew she was sharp. They also believed she was prideful. That was the angle. If he could poke at her intellect just enough, she'd rise, raise her voice, fire back. And once she did, he could slip into his practice calm, the voice of measured restraint. "I didn't mean anything by it," he could say with a chuckle. "I just thought it was a fair question." The headlines would follow. Crockett lashes out. Tension derails the unity panel. Vance keeps his cool under fire. He played it out in his head like chess move, provoke, retreat, win. What he didn't know was that Jasmine had already played this game and finished it. The morning of the panel, JD Vance stood in front of the mirror, smoothing his tie, repeating the line under his breath like a spell. He thought it was control. He thought it was a checkmate. But real control doesn't need an audience. Real strategy doesn't rehearse how to provoke it, waits for provocation. And Jasmine had waited long enough. He didn't notice the envelope when she walked in. Why would he? To him, it was just another folder, another prop. The only story in his mind was the one he was about to tell. The woman is too reactive to govern, too fragile to hold power, the one who'd be rattled by a single sentence. So he leaned forward, dropped the line, smiled, and then it happened. Not rage, not indignation, no snapback, no stumble, just stillness. A pause so deliberate it felt like the air itself had been sliced open. Then her hand moved, not fast, not slow, just surgical. The black briefcase opened. The white envelope appeared, and J.D. Vance, for the first time in a long time, looked uncertain. He had written a trap, but she brought the answer key. The envelope didn't just sit there, it breathed. Heavy with the weight of foresight, the silence stretched. Cameras focused, millions watched, and J.D. realized the truth far too late. He thought the line was his move, but it was hers all along, because the only thing more dangerous than a sharp opponent is one who came prepared before you even opened your mouth. So what if the enemy already solved the problem you were trying to set? And what if they've just been waiting for you to trigger it yourself? There was no press release, no press, no campaign handler pacing outside. Just a nondescript testing center off a frontage road outside Fort Worth, hidden behind a shuttered mattress store and a dusty payday loan office. Jasmine Crockett parked 2 blocks away. No driver, no staffer. She walked in alone, baseball cap, low hoodie zipped to the chin. The name she used on the sign-in sheet wasn't hers, but the purpose was written all over her eyes. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed. A receptionist asked for ID without looking up. Jasmine handed over the one created for this moment, legally processed, quietly arranged. The CTI Congressional Testing Initiative, voluntary, unpublicized. Designed to evaluate critical thinking, decision-making, under pressure, executive reasoning metrics no one cared about until a man in a suit needed to prove he was the smartest in the room. Most lawmakers ignored it. Some mocked it. Jasmine signed up without telling anyone but her chief of staff. Lila had asked her that morning, "Why go through with it?" Jasmine didn't blink. "Because they'll question my tone first, then my degree, then my brain. I'm just loading the clip early." The exam room was cold, isolated, no cell phones, no distractions, just a gray desk, a biometric scanner, and a series of sealed prompts waiting to be unlocked, timed to the second. Jasmine sat down, rolled her shoulders once, then began. It wasn't easy. It wasn't meant to be. Logic trees that twisted like barbed wire. Abstract puzzles designed to shred confidence. Case-based scenarios with no right answers, only better ones, faster ones. Halfway through, her head pounded. Her throat was dry, but her pen didn't stop moving. This wasn't a performance. There were no cameras, no applause, no interruptions to survive. Just the silent grind of intellect under pressure. And she didn't flinch. Because Jasmine wasn't trying to prove brilliance. She was proving resilience. She was proving that her preparation didn't begin with the insult. It began long before, in kitchens, with shut-off notices, in libraries, with hand-me-down books, in courtrooms stacked against her. She didn't want to weaponize the score. She just wanted it sealed, protected, like a final defense for a war she never asked to fight, but always saw coming. By the time the proctor stamped her results and slid them into the embossed CTI envelope, Jasmine's fingers ached. She tucked the sealed paper into her briefcase without looking at it. No celebration, no relief. Just a quiet nod, as if to herself, as if to history. She walked out the same way she came in, alone, unnoticed. The world would never know she was there. But the day J.D. Vance leaned into that microphone and said the wrong sentence, she already had the answer. And she had it in writing, not to prove she was smart, but to prove she'd been ready all along. The envelope never left her briefcase. Not for hearings, not for flights, not even during recess. It sat there flat and pristine, tucked behind a stack of notes and highlighters, just thick enough to remind her it existed. Jasmine didn't check it, didn't reread it. She didn't need to. The moment it was sealed, it had already done its job. Lila noticed it one morning during a pre-brief for an oversight hearing. "You gonna keep carrying that thing everywhere?" she asked, half-joking eyes flicking to the leather case on the floor. Jasmine didn't look up from her notes. "You carry mace in your purse, right?" she replied. "Same thing. I'm not trying to prove I'm smart. I'm proving I'm tired of being doubted." It wasn't ego. It was armor. Because in Washington, credentials weren't shields. They were invitations to scrutiny. Her law degree challenged. Her tone picked apart. Her pauses mistaken for confusion. Her confidence was misread as combat. Men like Vance didn't just disagree with her, they undermined her. With jokes, with smirks, with silence designed to rattle. And still she stayed still. The envelope was not about superiority. It was about survival. She didn't plan to use it, never imagined it would land on a table beneath 1,000 cameras. But she carried it the way other people carried rosaries or pocket constitutions, not to flaunt, but to feel ready, in case the room turned, in case the rules changed, in case someone leaned into a microphone one day and mistook her quiet for emptiness. Because she knew the pattern. First they say you're emotional, then they say you're lucky. Then they say you're not really qualified. The envelope was for the moment they reached that final insult. It was her last line of defense, and she built it before they even picked up their weapons. Late at night after committee meetings and cable hits and speech drafts, she'd unzip her briefcase, run her fingers along the flap, and close it again. Just a touch. Just a reminder. Not of intelligence, but of preparation. That no matter how the headlines twisted or the narratives warped, she had a sealed truth that couldn't be talked over. The test wasn't about IQ. It was about readiness, and readiness was the one thing they never saw coming. When J.D. Vance leaned forward and said the words, "Maybe we should both take an IQ test," something shifted that only Jasmine Crockett could feel. It wasn't rage. It wasn't even a surprise. It was a quiet, surgical click, like a key turning in a lock she'd built months ago. The moment wasn't explosive, it was activated. Not by insult, but by inevitability. She had seen this play before. The setup was wrapped in sarcasm, the smirk. The crowd waited for the woman in heels and grit to crack. They expected her to raise her voice, to tremble, to fumble for facts. But Jasmine didn't blink. She reached slowly, calmly, like she was retrieving a document, not a weapon. Because she hadn't brought the envelope to attack. She brought it to survive. The briefcase opened. Her hand moved without hesitation. White paper, gold seal. When her fingers slid it across the table, it wasn't defiance, it was defense. Quiet, precise, lethal in its restraint. The live stream viewer count was climbing. J.D. Vance's face was flattening, and still Jasmine said nothing. Because this wasn't a rebuttal, this was a boundary. Months earlier, when she'd sat in that cold testing room, she hadn't known when or where the insult would come. She only knew it would, because that's how this system worked. First they erase your softness, then they challenge your sharpness. Then they corner you into proving the thing you never should have to, that you belong. So she prepared. She studied. She sealed the result, not to parade it, but to carry it like armor. And now the moment it was meant for had arrived, dressed as a joke, delivered with a grin. But Jasmine had already written the ending. Her stillness was a strategy. Her silence was a sentence. And when the envelope landed in the center of that polished table, every room watching felt it. That this wasn't theater. This was the cost of being doubted long enough to build your own protection. Not everyone carries a test score, but everyone carries something. A memory, a document, a truth sharpened in secret, and in a world built to undermine your worth at the exact moment it fears it most. What would you carry? Would you raise your voice? Or open the envelope you've been holding all your life? It started with one sentence cut clean from the live stream, compressed into a 36-second clip, and uploaded by a college intern working the congressional social media desk. No effects, no background music, no captions. Just a close-up on J.D. Vance saying, "Maybe we should both take an IQ test," followed by Jasmine Crockett sliding the white envelope across the table like she was serving evidence in a courtroom. Then silence. Cold, surgical, unforgettable. Within minutes, it detonated online. By the end of the first hour, the clip had 86,000 views. By hour 6, it was over 1.1 million. At the 24-hour mark, it cracked 3.2 million. Newsrooms across the country paused their midterm coverage to cut packages. TikTok creators looped her stillness into remixes. Late-night writers rewrote their monologues. But it wasn't the line that broke the internet. It was the look on her face. The calm, the readiness, the unshakable precision of a woman who had been underestimated one too many times and finally decided to stop waiting for permission to win. The hashtags arrived like wildfire. Hashtag envelope energy. Hashtag for receipts. Ready. Hashtag silence wins. Even people who didn't follow politics reposted it. Teachers, nurses, coders, students who'd been talked over in classrooms, employees who'd sat through meetings where their ideas were repeated back to them by louder voices. They didn't just watch Jasmine Crockett. They saw themselves in her. Memes followed. Tweets with 10,000 likes read, "He brought a smirk. She brought a sealed document." This is what happens when you study for the test they didn't know they were giving. Not loud, not petty, just prepared. But behind the virality was something deeper, something sharp. For years, black women in politics had been forced to play defense. Smile wider, speak softer, swallow interruptions with grace and turn insults into teachable moments. Jasmine did none of that. She didn't yell. She didn't flinch. She brought facts. She brought silence. She brought a weapon they didn't see coming. The internet didn't just applaud, it erupted. CNN ran a segment titled "IQ and Power When Preparedness Becomes Protest." MSNBC cut together a side-by-side analysis of Jasmine's statement delivery versus JD's body language, how his jaw locked, how his eyes darted, how his fingers twitched under the table. Fox tried to spin it, calling it premeditated optics, but even they replayed the clip twice. And somewhere buried beneath all the metrics and headlines was one inescapable truth. Jasmine Crockett didn't go viral because she humiliated JD Vance. She went viral because she proved you don't have to perform rage to hold power. You just have to be undeniable. And with one envelope, she rewrote the rules of engagement. The video hit 1 million views before lunch. By nightfall, it was on every screen that mattered: iPads, smart boards, gymnasium projectors. But it wasn't just adults dissecting the moment. It was kids, fidgety, sharp-eyed, half-bored students who sat forward when Jasmine Crockett slid that black envelope across the table like a detonator. In a civics class outside Cincinnati, the clip froze mid-frame. The envelope. The hand. JD Vance blinking too fast. The room was silent, but not from discipline. It was the silence before something shifted. The kind of hush that settles in when someone dares to break a pattern without yelling, without flinching, just by being ready. "Play it again," a student muttered. So the teacher did. In Des Moines, another classroom went dark. Fluorescence off, projector on. Jasmine's voice didn't boom. It was cut. Quiet, clipped, surgical. "I didn't take this test for you. I took it for every time someone called me lucky instead of prepared." Students stopped chewing their gum. One boy in the back gripped his desk like he was bracing for a blast. Then the moderator read it, "Top 2%. And in that moment, a young girl, 12, maybe 13, with braids pulled tight and fire in her jawline, raised her hand. Not shy, not meek, just precise. Her words didn't shake, but they landed like glass cracking on tile. "Do I need a perfect score to be respected?" The teacher's heart hit their throat. The projector hummed like it might short-circuit under the weight of that question. Some students stared at the screen. Others stared at her. The girl didn't blink. It wasn't a question for extra credit. It was a flare. And every kid in that room, every kid who ever got labeled too loud, too slow, not college material, saw it for what it was: a challenge buried inside a whisper. In Little Rock, a high school debate team changed their entire tournament speech. "Preparation is protest," the new title read. In Oakland, a student council printed stickers #BringYourEnvelope. In Queens, a school resource officer asked to re-watch the clip alone during his break and sat fists clenched until the screen faded to black. Back in Texas, a Cedar Hill middle school teacher found a note on her desk. No name, no punctuation, just 5 words: "She made me feel real." That was the power of Jasmine's moment. It didn't scream. It didn't explode. It entered the bloodstream of a generation quietly, like voltage under skin. No cape, no podium. Just a woman who knew that sometimes the loudest answer is proof sealed in silence. Across America, classrooms became war rooms. Essays replaced excuses. And one girl's question kept echoing down every hallway, every lunch table, every bus ride home. "What do I have to prove just to be believed?" By the third day, the headlines weren't dying, they were multiplying. JD Vance's name was no longer leading news cycles with his policy remarks. It was paired, hyphenated, stapled to a single moment that wouldn't dissolve: "Crockett crushes Vance on live panel." The clip was now on a loop in airports, embedded in political newsletters, dissected by body language analysts. His team tried everything: push back, redirect, over-explain, but the numbers didn't care. Neither did the silence. An internal memo leaked from his communications office. 6 words in bold underlined. Twice we can't afford another Crockett moment. It read like a battlefield assessment, as if she were an unpredictable weather system, not a policymaker. Staffers whispered about rethinking his approach, about prepping him harder, about never letting a single line go unscripted again. Meanwhile, Jasmine said nothing. No press tour, no victory lap, no slick TikTok with the envelope set to theme music. She didn't even retweet the viral clip. She just returned to her committee meetings, her late-night case, reviews her education reform binder thick with notes from Mississippi and Montana. While they spun damage control, she typed testimony. When asked by a Hill reporter about the moment, she simply replied, "We were there to talk about Title I funding. I'm still here for that." The quote went viral for a second time, not because it stung, but because it didn't need to. The contrast was brutal. Vance, a vice president, suddenly looked like a man struggling to wrestle the spotlight away from a woman who had never asked for it. Every attempt to reframe the moment, calling it a misunderstanding, an unplanned exchange, a distraction from the issue, only sharpened it further. He had underestimated her, on camera, in public, and she hadn't clapped back. She had simply been ready. That's what unnerved them. It wasn't the score, it wasn't the silence, it was the absence of ego. Power expects resistance it can label, defiance it can punish, outbursts it can frame. But Jasmine gave them none of that. She didn't stand on the table. She didn't demand apologies. She opened a sealed envelope and let the numbers speak in a room that had long tried to mute her voice. And maybe that's why it hurt more. Because when you lose to someone who never gloats, you don't just lose the moment, you lose the mirror. So here's the question. When someone wins without raising their voice, without breaking a sweat, without ever needing to say, "I told you so," do you feel it deeper? The calls didn't stop. CNN, MSNBC, NPR, even late-night talk shows begging for a sit-down. Producers promised prime slots, flattering edits, legacy-defining narratives. They wanted a victory lap, wanted her framed in lights made into a headline, a hashtag, a brand. But Jasmine Crockett didn't return their calls. Not because she was hiding, but because she was working. While J.D. Vance's team huddled in optics war rooms and tried to cauterize the wound, Jasmine sat in her office with a plastic container of leftover curry, a yellow highlighter, and gospel humming through her headphones. Mahalia Jackson, Trouble of the World. Her heels were off. Her inbox was unopened. The envelope that broke the internet now lay untouched in the bottom drawer, not framed, not mounted, not mentioned. Outside her door, the Hill buzzed with noise. Inside, she read funding data from Alabama district dropout rates from South Texas. Handwritten letters from teachers in Georgia who couldn't afford markers for their students. This was the real work, the part no panel cameras stayed for. No applause, no clips, no clickbait. She didn't need the moment to define her. She needed it to clear the path. Lila peeked in once. "You sure you don't want to at least respond to the Vanity Fair piece?" Jasmine looked up, smiled faintly, and shook her head. "They'll move on in a week. I'll still be here." Because that was the difference. JD chased stories. Jasmine built them brick by brick, statistic by statistic, child by child. She wasn't here to go viral. She was here to outlast. No tweet could capture the weight of a policy brief at 1 a.m. No meme could substitute for field notes from underfunded districts. No segment could measure the kind of power that comes from knowing exactly who you are, even when the world begs you to become someone else for a moment of glory. Jasmine had already won, not because she silenced a vice president, but because she didn't need to prove anything after. So while the nation replayed her silence, she wrote her next amendment. Because she didn't come to win arguments. She came to change the floor they were built on. They arrived in a manila envelope addressed in crooked handwriting to the Rayburn Building, no return address, just a shaky Ms. Jasmine Crockett scrawled in blue marker. Inside were folded notebook pages lined and smudged with pencil hearts dotting his names, signed with pride. Dozens of them from Cedar Hill Middle School, her hometown, her echo. One wrote, "You talk like us, you look like us, you didn't back down." Another, "My mom says you made the quiet feel powerful." A third, "I want to carry an envelope too." Jasmine read them all in silence, her fingertips pausing on every page like they were braille. Each word pierced deeper than any headline because they didn't see her as a politician. They saw her as proof that someone from their block, their struggle, their silence could stand still in a storm and not be moved. She leaned back in her chair, the Capitol quiet around her, and wrote a letter in return. Just one, typed on plain paper. No seal, no title, just truth. You don't need an envelope to prove your worth, she wrote, but it never hurts to carry one, not to show off, not to wave around, but to remind yourself when the world gets loud, when the room tilts against you, that you've already done the work, that your voice is valid before it's heard, that your presence is power even if they don't clap for it. She closed with a promise to visit them soon, not with a speech, just to listen. The letter was pinned to the classroom wall 2 days later, laminated beneath the school's plastic flag and dusty achievement plaques. Students gathered around it like it was a window to something possible. The teacher, holding back tears, whispered to the class, "She wrote you back." And in that instant, a new kind of envelope was passed, not paper, not sealed, but sacred. Because legacy isn't built in chambers. It's built in classrooms, in the minds of kids who finally see someone that sounds like their mother, looks like their cousin, walks like they've walked these same cracked sidewalks barefoot. And for those children, Jasmine Crockett was no longer just a congresswoman. She was the envelope, and she was already open. The offer came by email, no press release, no subject line screaming for attention. Just a simple message from a small nonprofit in Atlanta, one dedicated to mentoring first-generation students, often invisible to systems that reward volume over value. They'd seen the clip. They'd watched the silence. They didn't want to quote a keynote or a social media campaign. They wanted her name. The Quiet Leadership Real Impact Scholarship. A fund built for those who lead without needing the room to shrink. For students who prepare in silence, who show up with more facts than followers, who turn every doubt into documentation. For the ones who've been called too serious, too quiet, too intense, and carried on anyway. Jasmine read the proposal once, then again. No edits, no hesitation. She didn't call a press conference. She didn't schedule a tour. She signed the papers on a Tuesday afternoon between a school lunch bill markup and a constituent phone call from Tulsa. Her signature wasn't a ceremony, it was continuity. The scholarship launched quietly, almost in secret, but word spread like oxygen. Within a week, school counselors in Mississippi were printing out flyers. Debate team coaches in Detroit forwarded the application link. A student in Flagstaff wrote in her submission essay, "I don't want to go viral. I want to be ready." Another simply wrote, "This scholarship feels like someone finally saw me." Jasmine never mentioned it publicly, but in the back of her office, just beside the framed letter from a Cedar Hill classroom, she tacked up a single printed application, anonymous, no name. Just the final line that read, "I don't speak loud, but I speak last." That was the point. She didn't want the scholarship to raise her profile. She wanted it to lift someone else's voice. She wanted to exist in a world that too often rewards noise and flash and leaves behind the ones carrying substance and silence. And so she built a legacy not in marble or gold, but in the decision to create space for those who prepare without applause. No speeches, no stage, just a name, and a question, one that echoed far beyond that committee room. What kind of power changes the world without raising its voice? The kind that doesn't just speak, it waits, and when the moment comes, it opens the envelope. It started as a whisper in the halls of Capitol Hill, small, sharp, and unforgettable. Bring the doc. You never know who'll test you. No one needed to explain what it meant. It wasn't about a resume. It wasn't about confidence. It was about receipts, evidence, readiness, the quiet weapon of being prepared in a world that assumes you're not. Committee aides scribbled extra stats into margins. Press secretaries triple-checked footnotes before walking their reps into hearings. Junior staffers carried binders like shields, not just for optics, but for the unseen weight of being doubted. The phrase slipped into casual chatter, into side glances, before testimony, into the quiet moments when someone held their breath just before a question that wasn't really a question, but a test. And always somewhere behind the words was Jasmine Crockett's stillness, like a pulse. Outside Washington, the echo grew louder. In a ninth grade civics class in Milwaukee, a teacher replayed the panel clip for the third time. No commentary, just the silence after the envelope hit the table. A student in the back raised her hand and said, "She didn't even try to win." The teacher nodded. She didn't have to. And with that, the lesson plan rewrote itself. In a Houston barber shop, the clip played on a mounted screen above the mirrors. Clippers paused. Heads turned. No one said a word until the moment passed. Then someone muttered, "That's how you do it," and the room exhaled like they'd all just seen something sacred, something familiar finally done right. In dorm rooms, debate teams, break rooms, and churches, the energy lived on. It wasn't about IQ anymore. It was about preparation as defiance, silence as strategy, truth sealed and sharpened, waiting for the exact second to land. Jasmine never named it. She never chased it. But the ripple she sent across the country wasn't noise, it was movement, a shift. Not in politics, but in posture. How people walked into rooms, how they waited, how they no longer rushed to prove anything because they carried it already. And in places far from cameras, far from microphones, young voices started asking the right question. Not what do I say when they doubt me, but what have I already done while they weren't watching? In the chaos that followed, pundits scrambled to name it a viral clash, a humiliation, a political masterstroke. But strip away the noise, the thumbnails, the trending tags, and what remained was far more precise. J.D. Vance had brought a challenge. Jasmine Crockett brought strategy. He reached for the spectacle. She reached for the truth she had been holding long before he ever opened his mouth. He performed. She prepared. His moment was designed to provoke, to spark something loud, something reactive. But Jasmine didn't take the bait. She didn't escalate. She didn't flinch. Instead, she revealed what it looks like when someone has been tested their entire life and decides calmly, deliberately, to show their work. Because she wasn't playing to the cameras. She was playing to history. What rattled the room wasn't what she said, it was what she didn't need to say. No gloating, no insult, just a sealed envelope and a silence that demanded reverence. In a town built on noise, she made stillness into strategy. And in a world addicted to dominance, she made dignity look like the sharpest weapon in the room. J.D. Vance brought a jab. Jasmine brought a mirror. And when the reflection stared back, undeniable, unshaken, it told a truth no spin team could reframe. She didn't win the exchange. She exposed it. And that's what they really saw. Not just a takedown, but a shift. Not just a response, but a reckoning. Because when a woman like Jasmine Crockett walks into a room with every receipt already printed, folded, and waiting to be unsealed, the question is no longer whether she belongs. It's whether the room is ready for her. The lights were softer now. No crowd, no panel, no smirking vice president across the table. Just a camera. A crew that knew not to speak. And Jasmine Crockett, sitting tall, steady, the weight of the past weeks etched into her posture, not her expression. She didn't rehearse. She didn't read from notes. She met the lens with the same silence she carried into every room that expected her to break. And then she spoke not for applause, not for headlines, but for the ones who were still being questioned in places she'd already survived. If they question your worth in front of a crowd, she said, voice smooth as steel wrapped in velvet, don't yell, don't shrink, don't contort yourself into something smaller just to make them comfortable. She paused just long enough to let the next words land like a heartbeat. Just open your envelope. She didn't blink after saying it. She didn't explain. She let the silence speak. Because by now the world had learned her quiet wasn't hesitation. It was controlled. It was conviction. It was the sound of someone who no longer needed to raise her voice to hold the room. The camera didn't cut right away. It lingered, capturing the calm after the storm, the echo of a sentence that didn't shout but would carry. Jasmine turned slightly, folded her hands in her lap, and looked past the lens, past the moment, like she was already thinking about the next battle, the next hearing, the next young girl watching from somewhere in silence. And then fade to black. No soundtrack, no logo, just one question burned into the screen in white, unflinching letters. What would you carry if the world kept trying to test your value? The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was an invitation, a challenge, a memory. And for millions watching, it didn't feel like the end. It felt like the beginning of their own answer. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.